I was having lunch today with one of our other writers who's written this, Adam Gopnik, who's written a lot about the campaign. And he said every 4 years, we always say, because I'm tight, every 4 years we say, this is the most important election of our lifetimes, da-da-da-da-da. And he said, this time it's an emergency. You have a guy that has, on a daily basis, has been lying quite a lot, insulting quite a lot, shows no great familiarity with, the world. And or is this just us being hysterical on a quadrennial basis? Amy?
I would say two things about that. One is an example of an election where people actually at the time said this is not the most important election in our time, is the George W. Bush versus Gore one, when people were like, it could go either way. And that turned out to be monumental. That led us to Iraq.
There was a lot of talk of what's the difference.
Right. There was at that time. The other is that it's so crucial at the moments when you think that it's an emergency not to then say, so I've got to do whatever I can, including lie myself or be dishonest as a journalist or anything like that. So the more I hear the talk of that, the more wary I get. Obviously, also we've had a long and storied history. This is not the period where, a leading candidate has just been assassinated or the incumbent is there because of an assassination. Joe Biden, in his speech, maybe he's wrong, maybe he's right, but he said one thing. He said the American people have never let us down in times of crisis. You could probably think of a lot of counterexamples, but the message I think he had there was that we can't give up on our trust in our political processes.
Jelani, you've been very interested in third parties. You have a libertarian who has been polling as high as 9%, even though nobody knows his name. And you've had the Green Party that's been polling kind of around 3% in polls. Do you think this is all going to kind of fade away, or is in the Nader experience that's going to play a big role?
I think it's going to play a role because there's no indicator that any of this is going to change. It's like in Georgia, I guess about 8 or 10 years ago, when a Democrat was running and he was asked, what are you going to do to get the teachers to come out and vote for you? And he said, I'm leaving that up to my opponent. And so meaning that, his opponent is going to actually be so terrible that he'll do his outreach for him. And I think that the third parties, the libertarians, are looking at Donald Trump a little bit like that. And for the people who are in the Green Party, they're almost, I think, immune to the argument that there's any reason to participate in two-party politics. One of the kind of good examples of that was when the emails came out, and I was talking to two Bernie people who were Democrats, but they were saying they were going to vote in the Green Party for the Green Party candidate. And so I posed the question about whether or not the emails being leaked by Russia would make any impact. And they said, we don't care who leaked the emails. I said, well, what if someone wanted to provoke exactly this response? And they said, well, all they're doing is highlighting what we've already known all along. But certainly the titanic implications of a foreign, fairly hostile state being involved in American politics, having giving them no pause whatsoever, said that these people are going to be, this is where they are, and I don't think they're going to move for any reason.
Amy, what does the Khan incident tell you about Trump? He's had this incident that's been a kind of running narrative for the last several days. How is it part and parcel of him? And why is it that he can't learn from experience? These are not gaffes, as the president said today. Right. This is an everyday experience. And yet we think of them as gaffes, and he's in the running for the presidency.
We learned a couple of things. This is, I'm sure most people are familiar with it, but this is a very moving speech that was given at the Democratic Convention by the parents of Captain Khan, who died in Iraq, buried at Arlington. Trump reacted just in a way that I think by lashing out at them, by saying that he imagined that Mrs. Khan, whose face was just stricken, she was obviously took everything in her to walk out there and stand in front of this crowd. And he said, the the Muslim husband is keeping her silent. I think that what we learn about Trump from that is what he sees when he looks at an American couple, an American family that doesn't look like his picture of an American family. What he expects from, he said it didn't look like Mrs. Khan had anything to say. He doesn't think that a woman who was wearing a headscarf, whose skin is brown, has something to say. But also, the other thing we learned from that incident is how far gone the institutional Republican Party is. I mean, yes, it got a lot of headlines that other Republicans came out and criticized him for it, but none of the big ones have rescinded their endorsements of him. And one effect of what we're talking about is the more these guys get in a corner of saying, yes, I hate all these things he says, but Hillary Clinton is worse, that pushes them to demonize her even more. If she's worse than this, what is she? And so it gets to the point where the rhetoric from even people like Paul Ryan about Hillary Clinton becomes their equivalent of our emergency.